So individual is another way of, it's a subset of direct, but it's not used as much. And what I usually hear is direct, indirect, or systemic. But individual discrimination is also a term that gets used as well. Reverse, thank you for mentioning this. Why is it in quotes? I am going to give you the legal reason it's in quotes, and then I'm going to give you the injury reason why it's in quotes. And they are different. Recording. Okay. So, the legal reason why it's in quotes is because at some point, maybe in the last 5 or 6 years, we started to see an uptick in allegations of reverse discrimination. And it came out, at least in my practice, I started to notice it when, do you remember when Stats Can came out with that report saying like in 2018, the majority of Canadians will be of color? Do you remember when that came out? And you know, there's sort of like an uncomfortable media buzz, like, oh my gosh, can we use the word minority anymore? What does it mean? The white people can be minorities, oh my gosh, what does it mean? And so all of that sort of came out for a while. And so we started to hear this question about, well then what is, so if there are more people of color in Ontario or Canada, does that mean that they're the majority? Does that mean like then the discrimination is reversed? Like how does that, are white people the minority then? What does that mean? And so then we started to have conversations as reminders to say, well actually, discrimination and harassment and systemic oppression is about power relationships. And so numbers don't necessarily affect power relationships. And so this idea of reverse discrimination, legal, this is the legal commentary, reverse discrimination doesn't quite legally work because the Ontario Human Rights Code talks about historical disadvantage, right? So an increase in numbers doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be a switch of a power relationship. For example, if that were true, if that were true, then that would mean that the introduction of women into the workplace would have gotten rid of sexism, which it hasn't, right? So the introduction of more people from more groups doesn't necessarily mean that the power relationships will be switched in any way. And the myth, I will say, this is in Jerry, the myth of reverse racism, the problem with that is that it really ignores the power differential. So for example, when able-bodied people say, well now, because there are gender-neutral bathrooms, I can't be safe, right? Now it's reverse discrimination against me because I'm an able-bodied person or because I'm a cisgender person. Now anybody can use the bathroom and now I'm being discriminated against. Or when men say, this is a women's program and men have feelings too and how come I can't be in a support group? Or when white folks will say, well, I want my own White History Month, why can't I have my own White History Month? I'm gonna now just proclaim White History Month, right? Like, so when we get those kinds of responses, what an important piece to think about here is that we're still talking about power. So the question needs to be, when we hear reverse, is, well, have the power relationships been reversed? And if those have been reversed, then we can have a different conversation. But usually the answer is no. I see your hand. So that's why I have reverse discrimination here, because it is something that's coming up. So I would encourage you that if you in your classrooms, like you have students who are saying, well, isn't it reverse discrimination that we accommodate people because we're not being treated the same? Or isn't it reverse discrimination that we have International Women's Day but we don't have International Men's Day? Isn't it just, discrimination that we celebrate Pride or that we have these bathrooms or all those kinds of things? And you can respond to that by saying, okay, well, let's have a conversation about power and historical disadvantage, because that's what legal side, that's what the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario will say and has said in these cases. And in particular, I'll tell you about 3 cases. One case, there was a group for single mothers at a community center. A single father applied to be in the group. He was denied. So if we go back to discrimination, we have a negative outcome because he was denied. He couldn't participate in the group because of his gender. He was denied because he was a man. There was nothing shy about it. You're a man, you can't come, right? So there's a negative impact and a prohibited ground. So that started to sound like the legal definition, right? And not only that, there was a connection between his denial and his sex, right? So we have all of the legal tests of discrimination being met in this circumstance. But the tribunal said no. This is a special program, so remember we talked about Section 14. This is a special program designed to meet the unique needs of single mothers who have unique experiences of vulnerability in our communities. He says, but wait, men have disproportionate, single fathers have actually less services than single mothers. And the tribunal said that might be true. That might be true. But that still doesn't mean that as a man you get to be a part of this particular group, because it is protected by this exception. Right? We might not all like that, but that is what came through the law. And there have been similar cases dealing with, for example, exemptions. There's one case that had to do with a group of employees, and they worked with really heavy metal chemicals. There was a mask requirement, and a man said, well, the requirement was you had to shave your beard or shave all your facial hair to put on the mask for safety. The applicant said, I don't want to shave my beard because it is my gender expression. And I'm not making this up. I celebrate November, and it's very important to me, and so I'm not shaving my mask. So this wasn't in November, another month. I'm not shaving my mask. Takes it all the way up to the tribunal. The tribunal says, you are a cisgender, meaning you're not trans, you're a cisgender man. This ground of discrimination was not meant to protect the rights of cisgender men. It was to protect the rights of the transgender community. So this particular ground of discrimination doesn't apply to you because you haven't experienced the historical disadvantage experienced by the transgender community. So no, this is not a protection of your human rights, and the application was dismissed. So that is why I put reverse up there. It is a controversial area of law. It goes against some people's common sense, and it is definitely one example of discrimination that really speaks to our lived experience, right? My lived experience is going to be very different from most of you in the room, and there are certain things that I see in dynamics that you might not see and vice versa, because of our lived experience. And so this is one of the terms that really gets to it. So you had a question.
I think you kind of covered it off.
Okay.
The only piece I was wondering about is that you said reversing is sometimes attached to where the power in the relationship was.
Mm-hmm.
So if the power was different, then somebody wouldn't just be regular discrimination.
So I think the answer to what I think you're asking is, well, if the power dynamic that's at play is the same that it always has been, right? Then don't we just call it discrimination? And yeah, we do. Reverse discrimination is in quotes because it's a response. It's actually in Jerry. It's a backlash, right? As opposed to a legal term, in my view. But the Human Rights Tribunal will say that reverse discrimination might not always work because historical disadvantage is a really important part of how we understand discrimination. So if there's no historical if there's no historical disadvantage, then it wouldn't be covered under the code, because the code is not meant to protect all forms of discrimination, if that makes sense. Okay. Do you want to ask a follow-up question to that, or was there something I'm missing? It looks like I might be missing something.
No, I was just thinking of an example I recently read about up at Lakehead University, and the dean of the law school there. And just in reading some of that and then listening to this, I'm just trying to even it out.
Yes. Yeah. It's one of the reasons I love practicing human rights law is because it's not simple. It's actually complex, and it sometimes gets presented as very simple, and it's not. So, where do I point? Did I turn this off? Somebody the universe wants me to stay on key terms. Okay, so, yes, thank you. Is it frozen? Okay. So I'm going to go here first. Can you help me? Because I'm going to skip through this because we talked about it. So in your slides, you'll have like the legal definition and these definitions are taken from your own policies, so there'll be reminders for this afternoon and some this afternoon. So if you can flip through, Martha, please, the discrimination slide. This is your policy's definition of systemic discrimination. Bullying, harassment. I'm going to stop here for a minute. So bullying is one form of harassment. Not all harassment is bullying, but all bullying is harassment. This is a subset of harassment. And bullying requires a power relationship. So typically, if you think of like the classic schoolyard bully, usually it chooses a target that is perceived to be more vulnerable, and so on and so forth. Okay, so if we can move past that. I talked about sexual harassment. I'm not going to spend too much time here. And your policy has definitions for racial harassment, which is harassment that is linked with race, gender-based harassment, and disability harassment as well. So just to know that your policy drills down a little bit more, and you should be aware of the differences in these definitions. We can go to the next one. I'm going to spend some time at poison environment. I talked about this at the top. So the way that I kind of think about it is if you think about a scent in a room, right? So if I sprayed, assuming that some of you might have scent sensitivities, in which case this would be very problematic if I did this. But assuming that we don't, if I sprayed perfume once, probably smell it in the front for a bit, then it would just dissipate. Right? Spray it again, you'll smell it for a bit and dissipate. If I spray it enough times each day for a while, it'll get into the carpets, it'll get into the wall. And if I do just one spray a day for 15 years, this would just become known as the perfume room. And over time, we'll probably just accept that there's a particular room in the college that happens to always smell like perfume, but we just don't know why. Because of me. Because I've been spraying it for 15 years and no one noticed, right? So pretend the perfume is sexism, or homophobia, or ableism, or sizeism, right? Or any of the grounds of discrimination. And it can also relate to behaviors that are not connected to a ground of discrimination, right? So poisoned or toxic environments, just think of a little spray of sexism today. Not too big, just a little spray, right? So after a while, what ends up happening is that we become tolerant, right? To the little spray of this and a little dash of that. And before we know it, we have an environment. Sometimes we don't even notice when the toxic environment is around. We have this environment that condones particular behavior, right? And in our work, my work, when I usually notice it is because when somebody new comes into the environment, they're like, what's that, right? Like, don't you guys smell that? Have you been living in that for 15 years? Like, right? And so they're just like, how do you guys do your work, right? That's usually what will happen is somebody from outside will be like, there's a big elephant in the room, no one's noticed it, I'm going to raise it, and then we get into the conflict because what can sometimes happen is that we've tolerated it for so long that we don't even notice, and then we have to get convinced that it exists, and then we have to deal with the fact that we've also been a part of it. We've condoned it, I've condoned it, right? And that can be really difficult. So poisoned environments or toxic environments can be one of the most difficult environments to engage in because everybody's involved. Either you're the person who's engaged in the problematic behavior, either you've been the person that has a problem with the problematic behavior, but because of the culture, hasn't raised it because of the reputational harm or excommunication if you raised it. There can be pressure to be a part of the group if you're new. If you want to get a promotion, like there are all sorts of reasons why we go along with behavior, right? But what the code says, and what your policies say, is that you have an obligation to respond if you notice that something is going wrong. So if you notice that there's behavior that's problematic, there's an obligation to raise it and to participate. Remember, if you go back to your policy, I underlined it, cooperate in the college's efforts to maintain a discrimination harassment-free, because remember, little spritz of oppression is still oppression, and your policies are promising a discrimination and harassment-free environment, right? So like one spritz counts, like that spritz is a thing, and it can lead to lots of money if it gets to the tribunal. All right, so poison environment, toxic environment, that's what this is focused on. All right, so we can switch key concepts. My favorite, intent and impact. And love talking about this. I hear the groans of appreciation as well. Why do I love talking about intent and impact? Because I just find it really validating. So, this is where it comes up. You said a homophobic thing to me. Oh my gosh, I wasn't trying to do that. I was just trying to say A, right? So what you have on one side is somebody saying, you have engaged in a violation of my human rights. And the other person defending that with their good intentions. Okay? Now, intentions from, I'm going to talk about a legal perspective. Your intentions do not matter. Okay. They don't. Why you said that thing, why you did that thing, does not matter. If you're in an investigation, if a student makes an allegation that you said something, if you did it, your intentions do not matter for the purpose of determining whether discrimination and harassment occurred. Intent is not a factor in determining whether discrimination happened or whether harassment happened. Your reasons for saying that's okay or whatever it is do not matter. The fact is that the action took place or it didn't. Now, here's why this is a really big problem for some people. One of the reasons why it's a big problem is because we have been trained to be nice to each other, or to appear nice. Sorry, to appear nice, right? To appear cordial and civil and all of those things. And somewhere along the lines, we've been taught that if you appear this way, and if you speak in a way that, you know, appears friendly and so on, that that would protect you, right? And that that's enough. It's not from a human rights perspective. It's the impact that matters. And if the impact of the behavior is discriminatory or is harassing, then that's what it is. Okay? So the principle of intent versus impact is really, really important, right? So if you ask somebody about their pregnancy and they say, I was asked inappropriate questions about my health, about my body, that was a problem. Your intent to be welcoming is not going to matter. If you ask to touch somebody's hair, if you ask somebody about their, where they are in their transition, or what bathroom they use, or whatever it is, depending on the circumstances, the way that what you say and what you do land on someone might constitute discrimination, harassment, even if your intention was completely the opposite. Usually when I say this, it's followed by a very loud silence. And I've also been told, well, then I'm just not going to say anything, right? And you don't have to admit to thinking that, but at least 33% of you in this room are thinking that right now. Trust me, statistics, not psychic, right? It is because the response tends to be, well, if anything that I say, no matter what, could be discrimination and harassment, then why would I say anything? Why would I ask somebody what religion they are and if they had a good holiday? Why would I even talk about holidays at all? If I can't talk about Christmas or anything like that, like why? I'm just going to come to school and do my job and leave because everything else could potentially be harassment and discrimination. So I want to encourage you not to go down that road. Please talk to each other, inquire, build relationships, and all of those things. And maybe instead of focusing on, well then what can I say? Maybe then focus on what your response would be. And I'll use myself as an example. I have made a lot of mistakes in my life. I have used wrong pronouns. I have misgendered people. I have asked inappropriate questions. I have crossed boundaries in terms of the questions that I've asked, and so on. I have done that. We have all done that. I have done that. And what I have had to learn throughout my process as an adult, like part of adulting, is being able to say, oh my gosh, I did that thing, take an ego inhalation, right? Suck back up the part of me that's like, but I just wanted to be your friend. friend, right? Just suck it up and be like, and I discriminated against you in the process, right? And then we move forward from there. What are your boundaries? Okay, I didn't realize. So I was working at an employer, and a colleague of mine was pregnant, and I was so happy for her. And we had connected for months, and I saw her pregnant belly, and I was like, oh my gosh, and I touched her belly, because I just wanted to like show her that like, I saw her beautiful pregnant belly, and I was so happy that she's having a baby. She didn't talk to her for 3.5 months. And I didn't realize why, because I was young, didn't realize why. And then later, she was like, you touched my belly. You don't touch pregnant women's belly. You don't touch anybody. Why would you? Do you touch non-pregnant people's bellies? Why was my belly more accessible to you? Why are you touching my belly? Right? And I now realize as a lawyer that that was unwanted touch. Because I touched your belly. Why am I touching people's bellies for? Right? And so I had to sort of sit with that and just be like, okay, that wasn't okay. Right? And so my response now would obviously be different, but that's one of the things that you can think about. Instead of being like, well, I can't hug or high five or anything like that, well, you might not be wanting to hug without asking. True. But it doesn't necessarily mean that all of your relationships need to just be very like robotic and so on. Maybe the focus is on how do you ask permission, right? Can I ask you a question about your religion? Can I touch you? Don't. Can I touch you? But like, can I give you a hug? I'd like to give you this. May I ask you this question? Like practicing not taking those things for granted, and also practicing how to say this is discriminatory or harassing, and how to respond to that as well, and to accept I have now engaged in discriminatory behavior. This is not an indictment. It now means I need to change my actions. And that's it. That's what we're going to do now. Right?